Hello, and welcome back to the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today, we're going to knock out the entire series of Romulus.
Yes, the very long run of 4 issues.
Well, yeah. But I think the gift of a series like this is the headcanon that it invites you to create.
I especially with this book in particular. It's a very vivid and specific world they built. And because they never got to play in it. Because as we said last week, this book is basically a pilot. This book, issue 4, ends with the setup for what the story is actually going to be, and we never get it.
This is basically Batman Begins, but when he gets on the plane with Alfred to go back to Gotham after burning down the League of Shadows place. That's the end of the movie. Roll credits. Yeah. No, it's before he decides to be Batman. He doesn't have the costume or anything. Well, I guess on the plane he says, like, I want to be a symbol or something.
Yeah, he already knows what he's going to do, but you don't see him actually headed do the
back
thing.
Into the world, and you just, all right, hard stop. That's the end of it.
Yeah, because what they set up here is, these seemingly opposing forces, right? As we jump into the book, the Order of Romulus and the Illuminati. These two forces shadowy forces that are allegedly controlling the world that appear to be on different they're opposing each other, but they may not be so different, but what they've set up is our main character Ash being kind of this conduit to both of them, and her, what you have to imagine, the struggle of deciding to leave one, Romulus, and potentially join another, the Illuminati, when to her it seems like they're both saying the same things but in different tones. But so we don't get what that struggle is, because we never see what that clash is, what that confrontation is. That's what the book is setting up for you to see, and you're just left hanging, because at the end of this book it's just like setting all the pieces up. They set the entire board up and you're ready to play, and then that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think reading it in 2016, that was, let's put it as mildly as I can. It was an election a lot of people had a lot of feelings about.
Yeah.
And it was very much one of like, okay, well, I know one thing's bad and the other one might also be bad, but the first one's definitely bad. Yeah. And I think that was where a lot of people felt culturally. And I think this book, had it caught the right audience, her struggle of saying like, well, I know I'm anti-Romulus.
Yeah.
Illuminati seems like they're here to help me. They're saying all the right things. Not sure I trust them, but I definitely don't trust those guys.
For Ash, it's an enemy of my enemy kind of thing. It's like, no matter what, she's anti-Romulus. She might end up being anti-Illuminati, but right now the Illuminati are also anti-Romulus. So might as well side with them for now.
And to me, so I've already used the Batman Begins comp. She has what I think is a very Captain America moment, or at least like the Russo brothers' vision of Captain America. Toward the end, when she and the pop star are kind of talking to each other about like, freedom and what it means and all this other stuff. And she says, something like, well, I'm not sure I have like the strength to leave the Illuminati, or I'm not sure I really agree with them. Ash is like, cool. Well, I'm here with you. I trust you. And if when it's all said and done, you want me to burn this down too, I'll do that. It's like, it was that final letter in Civil War where it was like, I'm never placing my trust again in institutions, but I will always be trusting in people. And I think that's where Ash is. That said, I do think there's a great irony to her character in that she's very skeptical of every institution except this like institutionalized view of her mother. Like her mother can do no wrong. Her mother was perfect. Her mother, like when she's like losing a fight, she's like, my mother, wouldn't have this. I'm like, your mother got full of bullets. She wasn't the perfect fighter.
They play into that when like part of the pitch for her to be recruited by the Illuminati is like, yeah, we knew your mother. She worked with us, and of course that's the kind of thing that can go both ways in the story, where you're setting up to gain the character's trust, and then we find out later that it's all a bunch of BS.
Oh yeah, no,
in some
I
of the
actually
storylines.
think
But
now see this is the headcanon
yeah,
because I
exactly.
saw
Yeah,
it going
yeah.
a completely different direction.
Well, I'm saying it could go either way. But I'm saying what's presented in these four issues here is playing on her view of her mother. And I think initially it's like, well, if my mother trusted these people who are my mother, who was anti Romulus, which is why I'm anti Romulus, if they're saying my mother trusted these people who are also anti Romulus, then maybe I can put my trust in them as well. And that's the very obvious kind of story setup for an ultimate betrayal at the end of issue 8, and then you know
Now see, yeah,
we talked about last week. You asked me how I could have seen the story going, and I talked about it could easily go on 20, 30 some odd issues, but I think my first answer was I saw it going at least 12. And so you have this 3-act story structure. You have four issue story arcs, and I could totally see where issues 5 through 8 are them taking on Romulus and probably defeating Romulus. And you think it's this is this the end here, but then it turns out that the whole time she's fighting with the Illuminati, Ash is, and then but she's skeptical. There's a lot of internal monologue from her, the way it's presented in the book. And so you're getting into her thoughts. She has some reservations of the things they're doing, but they're still fighting for the same cause. They do it, and then in the end, there's a turn. The Illuminati, oh no, they're bad guys too. And then she now has to break from them, and then issues 9 through 12 are her on her own, having to take down the institution that she put in charge because
all
she
right.
helped
So
them take down the other institution.
yeah, I don't think my rogue takeaway was as different as I thought it was,
Yeah.
but yeah, I was thinking, well, what if the Illuminati's trying to play off of her by saying like, "Oh, your mother was basically, honorary member one of us" type thing, and the logical attack, uh, for me would have then been for Romulus to come to her and say, um, your mother wasn't really who you think she was, and like show some like incredibly damning evidence that like you have built your whole identity around being just like your mother, and we're going to show you she was not really worth imitation. So then you have one group who's saying like, oh, this is what your mother would have wanted, this basically what your mother was doing, and the other one saying like, you don't really want to follow your mother, like she was not that great of a person. And
You know what? You know what? That's the end of issue 12 right there. The remnants of Romulus, the woman CEO, maybe the one
yeah,
on top there.
Reagan,
She gets taken down. You think she's dead, but you
little
don't see a body. And then she comes back at the end of 12, drops the bombshell about her mother, and boom, that sets off issue 13 into our next arc, 13 to 16. I can totally see it play out that way. And maybe that means I'm only seeing the very tropey standard story arcs there, and not that's necessarily a bad thing, but when you're left hanging like this at the end, your mind tends to wander. Because I think both of us really like the world they built up. You like the idea of the shadowy cabals that secretly won the world, right? That idea, these opposing forces, the invisible hand behind history. There's, as we mentioned last week, the issues and the trades, they have all that back matter, historical quote unquote back matter. So Hill and Nelson put a lot of work into that, to building this out. So it shows that there's a level of care to and a specificity to their world in terms of how it does work with these shadowy organizations. And again, I think I found it, and I think probably you do as well. I found it so engrossing, the world to be in, that when you get to the end, you can't help but think about where the characters could go next, and how they could expand the how they could expand what they set for a foundation in these four issues.
yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%, and I gotta be honest and say like I just take it as the hallmark of good writing at this point that when I finished reading this, I just kept thinking of like, where will this go next? What will happen?
Yeah.
Because there are so many other comics I read, not going to name anything in specific, but I'm done thinking about it before I'm finished reading it. where you're just reading it and you're just like, oh my gosh, the reader is 3 steps ahead. Like everything here's been said a billion times. Like they have just nothing to add to the conversation here. And when you get something that has a little more meat on the bone, like something to interact with, something to chew on, something to like fill you with wonder and awe, like you really cherish it. And that's why it's so tragic when, stuff like this gets cut down in its prime.
And I wonder specifically about this book, because you made the parallel to the real world comps. You got to remember, this book being released in October 2016 means it was conceived and written and created well before, you know, probably an idea they've had for a couple years. You work on it in late 2015, early 2016, something like that. So it's coming out into it is coming is being released into a world that is different from the world it was conceived in, using 2016 as a pivot point there. So I wonder, let's say this again, issue 4 comes out in May 2017. I wonder if any real life inspiration seeped into that issue. But then let's say they take a break for months and they do come back with issue 5. How much of what we experienced in the world and what people were going through would then be reflected in a book like this? That is, it's again, this is a book that is our world, but like slight twist to it. There's some
Well, it's what
not
it's what certainly some people think our world is.
and that's literally where I was going. This idea that,
Okay.
but the idea that there's not superpowers per se. You've got ninjas and stuff like that, and whatever pharmaceuticals those soldiers take to enhance their state. So there's some a little like real soft sci-fi into it, but we're not talking about like mystical cabals and all. At least we haven't gotten to that quite yet. Although I guess we do have a psychic. So
Yeah, and
you know
whether you have a werewolf or not, or whether it's just imagery.
that is true. That is true.
I think
So
it's
so
just
I,
imagery.
I
Like, when you see her running on the battlefield toward her mom,
and turns
and then
into a
there's
wolf.
right.
Yeah.
I'm like, I didn't take that as her literally turning into a wolf.
I'm with you on that. But the idea, I guess, again, that it is essentially our world with a slight twist to it, which, as you said, is what an unfortunate number of people believe our world is actually run. That there is some shadowy cabal behind it all. There is an invisible hand guiding the world, and that those thoughts, that viewpoint, only intensified in the last decade or so, and
Right.
those ideas have become, I don't want to say they're more mainstream because they're not more mainstream, but they're more of forethought than they were prior. And so I wonder what a book like this, knowing the kind of books that Bryan Hill has written. I mentioned last week American Carnage, which is a book. Again, if you don't remember, that's a book about an ex FBI agent, an African American ex FBI agent who is light skinned enough to be white passing, who then infiltrates a white supremacist group to try and root out a potential murder and bring them down. So it's not like a writer like Bryan Hill is going to shy away from any overtly political ideas or landmines. And so I
Right.
wonder if this book continues, if you get some of those more overt references and inspirations from what our society went through in the intervening years after this book came out, after issue 4 ended, because I think a book like this is ripe for it, where you could start seeing it, and where a book like this becomes commentary on our world, more direct commentary, I guess, versus just, I guess in this case, kind of like allegorical. It's more specifically pointed at people, ideas, events, things like that are more recognizable to the actual world we live in. I feel like this is the kind of book that could have done that. Whether that makes the book better or worse, all depends on the actual execution. But again, I could see that kind of path for this book.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. The fact that like you and I are like just automatically filling in the blanks, and I consider us both savvy readers. I don't think I promote the podcast the same way you do. Someone told me that you described our podcast to them as two guys who think they're smarter than everyone else. And I think that came back to me
Okay,
from a comic shop.
okay, but okay, so maybe I was just describing us as people, maybe not the show in general.
Right. I
But
was
I
like,
don't think I'm wrong about that about you and I. Let's be very clear about that. I think I'm
well,
dead
okay.
on about that.
So I think we have a high view of our expertise in this domain. Like
Uh,
we're not off opining on everything, acting like we're smarter than everyone, but it's like I
that
think
okay, that's
I
yeah.
think and we've talked to like creators, I think our understanding and appreciation of story has been validated. And I think
I
that's
think
like
we
that's
can go
like
with that.
saying you're a really good wine taster or something. It's like I'm not a good wine taster. I like wine, I'll drink it. And if someone tells me I'm drinking a really good wine, I believe them. But I I don't have the discerning palate, whereas I think all I'm saying when I have an inflated view of ourselves for the podcast is like I think we have a refined palate, and I think we like
I
have,
think that I think that's
especially
fair.
when we both like something.
I think that's fair. I
Because
think
I
we can
think
pick
there's
out the
stuff you
things that
like
are
that
good.
I don't, and vice versa.
Yeah,
And when we come here, this is common ground. It's like, okay, well, here are two different readers who have really read a lot of stories, comics and otherwise, and um, there's at least something worth talking about when we bring a book up.
I think so. And I think that this is a rare case where the thing we both definitely latch on to is less about the specific story, because again, it's obviously unfinished. But I think we both like the world that Hill and Blake created here. I
Oh
think
my
we like the
gosh, yeah,
idea. We like the setting. We like all of the table setting they did, all the work they did to create the environment for their characters to go into. I think the characters are mostly pretty good. You talked about a small class of characters. You don't get a lot here for anyone other than really Ash, and actually probably the second most you get is the evil lady CEO. You
yeah, you
know,
gotta set her up.
yeah, you set her up a little bit as clearly kind of being the face of the villains of Romulus. We have our genius engineer, and then we have our pop star psychic. That are still a little one note. So it's not fully formed yet, and not to say you would expect that in what's meant to be the opening chapter, the opening salvo in a story. But so it's not great in that sense yet, I don't believe. But definitely, just again, the setup for the story, the world that it's in, the possibilities are almost endless. I think what you and I just discussed about where the story could have gone or is just one avenue, and it's probably the most basic avenue, and I fully admit that. The idea of just ultimate betrayal, or sorry, inevitable betrayal, and then our character who's a literal lone wolf,
Right.
then has a story arc where she has to then be a lone. I mean, like, that stuff seems really basic, and I'd almost hope that
That
the
they'd
people
subvert
behind
in
the
some
story
way. Yeah.
would do something much more interesting and creative like that. But the fact that the storyline that I just laid out there was like the first that came to mind, meaning that it was very simple for me to see where the story could go in a direction that I would still find interesting, even if it were basic. I think I would still find it interesting. But yeah, I think there is a lot to like here. I guess one thing that jumped out to me that I want to ask you about, moving away from story, moving away from world building, on a very just kind of basic technical level. How did you find Nelson Blake II's art? Because he's not an artist I know a lot of. I have not read a lot of stuff from him. Uh, if I'm being totally honest, the stuff that I have of his are the covers for the Miss Marvel run that I mentioned last week. Again, not interiors, just doing covers. Like, I haven't
But
read.
that great 8-bit cover.
Yes, yeah, the game cover, yeah, which is that ties into the storyline that was going on in Miss Marvel at the time. But like, I haven't read any. I don't read any of the Witchblade stuff or any of the extended universe. I haven't read any of that stuff. So he is not an artist that I knew. Um, but I found myself very compelled by his art. I like it. I like his character design. I think he does action really well, which is obviously very important in this book, given the amount
Huge.
of fight scenes and all that. But what are your thoughts on the art?
So, I'll break it down a couple ways. Penciling, I think is gorgeous. It's
Mhm.
clean. Characters are, distinct. Storytelling is clear. Emotions are very clearly conveyed.
I agree. Agree.
Um,
I think his character design is good.
yeah. Paneling, I like. I think it makes an intuitive read. It doesn't always necessarily feel, uh, I can't think of the word, like intentional. It seems like, it seems like more he's using paneling as like the economy of storytelling rather than like trying to do something clever with the panels. So there's
Oh
nothing
yeah,
wrong with that. But it's like, here's one vertical one, two side by side that are the same width as a vertical one, and then the bottom two-thirds of the page is one big um
yeah,
art
yeah.
box. And like I couldn't find a rhyme or reason to it other than like I have a page and I have to fit this much stuff on it. And so I did what I had to do.
Yeah,
And absolutely nothing wrong with that approach.
I think there are only a very few pages and scenes and moments where they get creative with the paneling. I just came to one as you were talking because it sparked something in me, and I was trying to find it, and I found it real quick. It's an issue 2 when we first meet the pop star
When
what
she's doing a tele the
Sozo, whatever. Yeah, when we first meet her, she's surrounded by candles. And then there's the kind of the bottom two-thirds of the page
That's
is
really
the
cool.
close-up of
Yeah,
her
yeah.
face, but it's divided into like eyes, nose, mouth, basically separated into 3 panels there, but it's one image. Uh, they don't really do a lot of that. They're not really, it doesn't seem like they're trying to take big swings with the paneling, which obviously you can do a lot of, especially with a book that has a lot of action to it, a lot of fight scenes. You can do crazy things with panels at different angles and on a slant, on a bias or whatever, to help,
I mean, I was just
help.
showing someone the David Aha from the Seeds,
Mhm.
where there's the implied panel
Yeah, yeah,
from
yeah,
like
yeah,
the artwork in it's like, my God, like
yeah,
the thought and detail that goes into that. So that
exactly. Yeah.
became my standard for it.
Well, yeah, and I guess something like that is clearly intentional. What they're trying to set them up by having panels without using panels, which means they want to show that divide without having it physically for the reader. It's a metatextual divide of there's like a stack of books here or a computer in the way right where the panel bar would be, and it separates 2 characters. It's clear that they were going for that storytelling choice. Here you don't really have that, but again, you do see a lot of books with a lot of action, especially books that have a lot of acrobatics. We talked about the last couple of weeks, if you go back to our Loeb and Sale month, especially with books like characters like Daredevil or Spider-Man. I also mentioned someone like Nightwing. Anyone that has a lot of acrobatics, a lot of moves, a lot of flips and things like that. Um, one way you can do action, one of my favorite effects and that I talked about was the DeLuca effect. Big splash page, and you see multiple versions of a character as they move through a scene. It works very, very well for anybody that has an acrobatic fighting style or movement style, because you can see them literally bounce across the room as they move across the page. It's a way to depict action that's different than just here's 5 different panels, you know.
Right.
It's a way to show motion. With fight scenes, you can do stuff again by slanting your panels, and so to mimic a strike or a hit or a slash or whatever. There are things you can do visually, just like you move a camera, on a movie or a TV series. They're not really trying to go for that. And again, I think you're right. It's not it doesn't make it better or worse because you can do it poorly. Obviously, you can take a big swing and miss by a mile, but they're not really trying to do that. And so when you have a page like this close up of Sozo here, our telepathic pop star with the face divide, when you have something like that, it does stand out because you then wonder like, okay, well, what were they trying to say here specifically that they didn't feel they wanted to try and do elsewhere in the book, or more often in the book? Why this one page? Was it just because they had one cool idea for this intro to the character, or is there something more that they either didn't want to do or decided not to do later? So yeah, the paneling I think is very standard, but within that paneling, I think especially with the fight scenes, kind of anytime you see Ash in action, I think are generally done well.
Okay. Yeah. So yes. So like penciling's great. Inking, uh, nothing
It's pretty
incredible
light.
there. Just builds on good
It's
pencil
not
work.
it's not heavy, which is good. Yeah.
Right. And then the coloring,
Mhm.
I do want to talk about, and this also
Sure.
ties in the paneling. So as I read the first issue, I was like, it's standard flat coloring. It's
Mhm.
nothing too exciting. But then immediately in issue 2, you get this backdrop, which made me think like, wait, there's no way this is pen and paper. This is a digital work. And then this next page after that, I'm going to put it on the screen, but this is like second or third uh, page of issue 2,
Oh, right. Kind of
but
it's in Ash's
there's
mind,
been
right?
this white gutter around everything
Mhm.
except this
Yeah.
page.
Yeah.
And in the coloring, everything is in the eyes. So you've
Mhm.
got the pop star reaching out to her with her purple eyes, contrasted with Ash's green eyes,
Mhm.
and then the wolves all up here, representing Romulus, have yellow eyes.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
like, here are three factions. Like to me,
Yeah.
that's the dead giveaway of like,
Wow.
uh, you know, oh, you can side with her in the Illuminati, but that's still a distinct side from your own. Um, and I thought that was a good bit of foretelling. But yeah, so the very first page here, I absolutely love the cinematic blur. Like when they're sitting, I think this page one of issue two, they're sitting
Yes.
in the restaurant. They
Uh-huh.
are very in focus. Everything out the window looks
Mhm.
like it's on a 4K camera with like a 50 millimeter lens, and everything in the background has fallen like very blurry, very
Yeah.
colorful behind them.
Mhm.
So cinematic, so cool. And
Yeah.
that actually reminds me a lot of when Liana Kangas was on the show. I was talking to them about a scene very early in like the first issue of True Cult where they're having a conversation at the burger place.
Yes. And you see
Eh,
the scene out the window.
The scene out the window, the cops
Yes.
pull up, and the focus shifts from one panel to the next. It's like now I'm focused on this person
But the conversation is still
about
happening in the
right,
foreground.
about the cop, yeah, and the
Yeah.
person's now out of focus, and what they're saying is kind of getting blurry and indistinct, um, because the focus shifts. So anyway, I at the end of the first issue, I was like, art, like pencils good, inking solid, panels fine, color fine, and when I got to issue two, I was like, color's good. I was like, that's that's at least a B plus on the coloring. Um, and honestly, like I think anything more from the coloring would be gaudy. So I think I'd have to get the coloring an A, pencils, A minus. Inking didn't get in the way, and then paneling, like C plus B minus.
Yeah, the paneling isn't important here. Although I do think it's interesting. 'Cause I agree. I love that scene that's there in the like the tea house, whatever, in Koreatown in LA there. But there are plenty of scenes, and you see it often in some of the action scenes where the background just goes solid color, or maybe just like,
Right.
maybe there's an effect behind them. Sometimes it's like action lines or whatever, or like lightning strikes or whatever. Where so it's almost like your background just blurs out and you just have two characters in the scene there when they're engaged in fighting. And so it moves back and forth through that sort of kind of texture in terms of kind of how it draws your eye and what they're trying to set up. And I like how it switches back and forth. And I didn't even think about the splash pages, and there aren't a lot of, I don't know, are there any double page splashes? I don't remember right now, but every so often there is a full page splash. And you're right. Even if it's a full page splash that's got like a small insert panel on or whatever, it's borderless. It's full bleed. It takes you all the way out. There's no border around the edge. And obviously it's meant to be expansive, whether you're looking at a landscape vista or whatever, or the scene that we just talked about, the one that's kind of the psychic image that's being presented in Ash's head. It's meant to be expansive. It doesn't have the restrictions of said even a border panel for the edge of the page. Anytime they go to that full page splash, it's full bleed. It's all the way out, and it makes it that much more kind of evocative too. In fact, I'm looking at a page right now, in issue 3 when Ash shows up at when she arrives at the Illuminati's camp, like in the snow. And even there, it's a full page splash of Ash and Sozo are psychic. They're looking down at the camp in the fire. There is an insert panel there of the plane landing that has a different paneling. It doesn't have the white border. It just
Okay.
has a black line around it. So even there, they're distinguishing those pages by something as slight as not doing the same kind of paneling. I think because it is an insert panel, you know, because it's overlaid on top of a larger image, they make it a point to do that differently. So even when they're not
Yep.
being wild with the paneling, they are still making story choices with them as needed. I think little things like that are good. if you're not going to go out of your way to get crazy with the paneling, to move the eye uh around the page to tell your story, it's nice to have kind of those little moments in there where um even those little things are considered too.
Also, this is just like a small detail about, I guess, the writing and the art working together, but how is it in like all of these action books I've always read? You know, there's so many movies, comic books, cartoons, whatever, where someone gets their hand stuck to a wall by having like a blade shoved through it.
Yeah,
Ash is the first person to use the stabbed hand to give someone the finger rather than like remove the blade and get
yeah,
away cleanly. I think that's in the second issue
yeah.
when
She
her
she well
tracker finds her at the yeah.
she stops getting stabbed in the face by getting intentionally stabbed in her hand, which I guess is a move. If you're effectively a trained ninja, I guess that's the. I
It's
mean,
a
I think
one trick
honestly,
pony. No,
I
you know
mean,
what? I'm thinking of
I,
the first issue.
it is in
Kind
the
of it.
first issue. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's during the when she's trying to save our
There's
inventor
just
from
so
the.
many issues I get it mixed
I
up.
I mean, I think I've seen Batman do that move before. In fact, I think
Batman
he
giving
did
the
it.
finger.
No, no, not giving the finger. I'm saying that by using his hand, just like
Right,
stab me
right,
in the
right.
hand, and I'll stop the blade from hitting me anywhere vital. Um,
Sure. That one makes sense. But so you have it here and
yeah,
then that and then here you flip the
yeah,
finger upside down.
with the knife still in
Uh
the hand. Yeah,
right. And that okay, so I guess maybe I'm like being too harsh on the panels. I think what disorients me about it is like, okay, so that page, which is most of the way through issue one,
mm,
not counting the backup stuff, you've got 4 rows, but the first 3 rows make up about 60% of the page rather than
yep,
75%.
yep,
And that's actually, that seems to be his signature. Because I was seeing it, it's, there were instances in issue two where the large part, the 40% part would be at the top, and then this would happen. Um, but yeah, so this one is just one of those where it felt like pragmatism, but there might be more to it that I'm missing. But you
there
have
might
one
be.
long, skinny one, then you have a slightly taller one broken into 3 blocks, then you have another skinny one that matches the top one, and then you have a larger one. So it's just like, is there something to that, or is it just like you only needed this much space for the guy, swinging his arm backward,
It
getting ready to punch?
it could be it could just be the specific needs of that scene and that sequence. I mean, there are plenty of times when you'll just have a regular 6 panel grid, you know, 3 rows of two equal, equally sized. Sometimes there are pages where the center panel is the biggest one, but it's not, but it's off center. I said that there are a couple times in issue three, and I think in four as well, where the panel won't be the same with it all the way across. Like maybe there's a an intermediate panel that has a larger white border on either side where you're kind of narrowing your focus a little bit. So they do a little bit with that. But again, I don't think it's enough to say like they're really trying to push anything with the paneling choices. But that's not to say that the paneling choices they did make were not intentional. I'm sure they were. They are all
Yeah,
intentional,
they
and there
have to
probably are
be.
stories. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just it's a matter of what their intention is. They're not trying to be wild and crazy with it. They're doing very standard things, I think, in terms of, oh, we're going to size and place the panels based on the needs of the story at the time. For an action scene, you're going to want something bigger and wider. The page you were just talking about, where Ash turns and flips the bird with the knife in her hand, that bottom panel is a kind of a mini DeLuca effect where she flips over her attacker. So you want more space there so you can see her crouch to make the leap, and then enough space where she can flip over. We can see multiple images of her as she moves and gets in position. So it could just be the constraints and the needs of whatever they need at the time for that page and that specific sequence. But yeah, it, I guess say
I
nothing
think it's
stands out of the
fantastic
panel.
art. I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
so I was looking
I
for a
said
nit to pick for the sake of being critical, but I think it's fantastic.
I think the art is really. I said I really like the way he does characters. I like the way he does faces. I think um he seems to be very good with small micro expressions. You always get what the characters are thinking when there's a subtle kind of shift in tone and intention with characters. I think he does faces really well, and I think that for me that goes a long way in terms of overall character design. I like what he does. It's not too busy. It's not like super clean. It isn't like a Darwin Cook or a Doc Shanna kind of thing where it's a super clean Leo Romero kind of artwork, but it's not like early 90s stuff like Romita Jr. or whatever, where it's just like a bunch of lines everywhere for shadowing or whatnot. So there's a nice in between there where it looks realistic, but he's obviously not going for photorealism. It still looks
Right.
drawn, it still looks like a cartoon or whatever, but there's still there's a realness in his depiction, which I really like. Um, I will say, in terms of a slight nitpick for me, is I'm not the biggest fan of the font the letterer used for dialogue. There's something about the font that they chose this book, where the
Does
letters are
it
just they're just
change throughout?
the
The boxes I know are different.
yeah
And then
the
there is
boxes.
non-box, non-narrative or non vocal text.
Well, yeah, the sound effects, the sound effects are overall pretty great. That's probably art. We talked to artists about that. Most sound effect, anything that's in panel, usually art is not the letterer. But yeah, the dialogue boxes, whether narration or whatnot, it's a narrower, it's a thinner letter. It's slightly italics too, which is fine, whatever. But I think just the width of the lettering for me is off, and
But
what
it's
they're
okay,
using.
so it's different in issue 4. Which it came much later, but it's not automatically bolded all the time in issue 4. And I think
Yeah,
that's what makes the letters bleed onto each other in the first 3 issues. So it
yeah.
seems like maybe they got feedback on that, which obviously, your second, maybe third issue would be in production by the time your first one hits the shelves.
Yeah, but again, there was such a long break
And they
between four
wanted to
and five.
redo the lettering for the fourth one, perhaps.
Yeah, I
And it
guess it
took a
does look a
minute.
little thinner. Yeah, it's a font style that I don't like. I know,
I
you
found
know,
it jarring with like when we switched from narration into dialogue, I was like, ugh.
well, yeah, yeah. Not to say you can't. Obviously, there are plenty of books that do that. We just talked about Superman for All Seasons, right? Like when some of the narration like it's in cursive, it's like it's supposed to look handwritten or whatnot. Oh no, I'm sorry, that was like Daredevil. Daredevil Yellow was like that we just talked
Oh
about.
yeah,
So there are plenty of ways you can do that, but it just that little it's a thicker letter. It's not quite bold because you see bold, but then when you see the bold next to the unbolded in the dialogue, it's not a style that I like. I think it can make it a little hard to read sometimes. So yeah, that again, these are choices that they make for whatever reasons, a style they like. It isn't a style that suits my eye. Um, I can remember the initial run of Spider-Gwen over at Marvel just didn't have great lettering. It was tougher to read because of the font style they chose, and I think some of the letter thicknesses. You had letters bleed into each other, and things looked the same. And so, um, and I guess I didn't really notice that it did change, but it does look different. It looks a little thinner in the fourth issue. But yeah, it's not. It, if I had a nitpick for me, it's a stylistic choice. I'm not a fan of the font they use for dialogue. The boxes, the narration boxes, I think they're great. Just that thinner letter line, uh, uh, for me, it suits my eye better, and it's easier for me to read. When it's that thicker line, almost always bolded, looks like it might always be bolded, isn't the greatest. So if I had a nitpick, it would be the lettering there. We often talk about like
which is a
oftentimes.
lettering choice, not a lettering competency thing.
Yeah, yeah. Again,
Um,
and I'm sure this is the kind of thing where letters, they have their bank of fonts or whatever, and you throw them out to the creative team, and you decide, hey, we're going to use this one here. So I'm sure it was a communal choice there, but you just and I'm sure there are plenty of people who read books like this and they just see words. It doesn't bother them whatsoever, and that's totally fine. If you don't see it, I'm not saying you're missing anything, but for me, I think I've read enough comics to where um I can see fonts that they don't work for me. That I don't like. I don't like how I read them and how I feel when I read them. They're just something feels off when they use lettering that just doesn't seem to quite sit right with me. And I think this is one case. If I had a nitpick, it would be the choice of the font. It just yeah, it doesn't it makes me it makes me feel uneasy when I'm reading it. I can't really explain it other than that. It's just I don't like how it suits my eye.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not merely subjective. I also felt like it slowed me down reading. It's
Mhm.
like I had to focus just a little bit more to distinguish letters and,
Yeah. So
words bumping into each
yeah.
other.
So yeah, it happens at times, but I now that you've mentioned it, looking, I've moved up here into issue 4 here, and it does look like it looks like it might be a slightly different font. It looks like it might be a little thinner on the dialogue lines. So
Well, and the
yeah.
big thing is that, yeah, I had made a note to myself in issue 1, like, yeah, whine about the lettering. And when I got to issue 4, I didn't realize it had changed. I was
Mhm.
just like, oh, I guess I just got used to it. It just took a minute.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and again, I didn't even notice it, but looking at it now, it does look like it's something different.
um, yeah. So, I mean, anything else to talk about with this book? Like, what, like the villain, I think had a pretty standard villainry thing. The name
Yeah,
Reagan's a little on the nose,
a
although
little
I
bit.
like it. Um, and practicing lines in the mirror. The World Economic Trust is funding company. Oh no, wait, what's the where it's like people shouldn't be asking me. Uh, oh yeah, yeah. Wealth doesn't make you a villain. Intention makes you a villain. When
Yeah,
people question my work with the World Economic Trust, they should ask, "What is my intention?" That's like the line in the mirror. The journalist
yeah,
eats it up because they're like having a relationship.
yeah. Or they
Um,
have end up having one. Yes, yeah.
they end
But
up
she's
having
clearly in
one.
the bag for her.
Yeah. I feel like it's on one hand, we're almost lucky more people didn't read this because I guarantee some politician would be saying that, be like, "Oh, that's good. Let me,
Yeah, it's
this
super
is,
villain line. Yeah, well, it's her daily affirmation to convince herself that what they're doing is right.
yeah, no,
But
it's
yeah,
just,
no,
well, that and like, and our leaders will retweet anyone. Like,
yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I won't say who, but a
But
presidential candidate definitely retweeted a Mussolini quote this week. I'll leave it to your
yeah.
imaginations which one.
Yeah, you get 3 guesses. The first
Um,
two don't count.
yeah.
But I think there is something we talked about both last week and this week. There is something very, very standard about the story setup, you know, which is why I think you're left wanting for more because you feel like, okay, the Reagan is the evil CEO billionaire who also is part of the secret cabal, so not just in the public facing world would she be seen as a villain, because billionaires just by nature would be, but she's also like secretly a villain behind the scenes, part of this evil shadow organization. All that setup is super tropey, super standard. And so it, because we've consumed the amount of story we have specifically in this medium, it makes sense that at some point there would be some sort of turn, that she's the bad guy, you get taken down, and people we thought were good, they go back. And not saying that Reagan would have redemption, but we would see her come back in a way where she'd end up working with Ash at some point. And again, that's where I thought I piggybacked off your idea of she comes back with, here's the real truth about your mother. And then the two of them
Right.
are forced to work together. So once again, Ash is put in this tenuous relationship of enemy of my enemy. But that's the kind of track you can see for a character that's been set up in the way that Reagan was, the way that she was presented. Everything we see about her says standard villain. And so your storytelling brain, your story pilled brain tells you that, well, she can't just be a standard villain then, right? She can't just be the evil.
Right. She's not going to be like the basic Marvel villain
Yeah,
problem.
yeah, yeah. They're going to give her some level of depth, whether it's backstory or whatever. There's going to be some sort of turn, and so you can predict that there will be a turn. Maybe you can't predict what the turn is going to be, but I think savvy readers would look at that and expect at some point that we would have gotten more from her, so that she is less overtly and obviously the villain in the way she's presented in these first 4 issues. So it's not like you're spoiling it by saying that she would be something else, because the specifics are to the whims of what the creators would be. But it seems obvious to anyone who's read stories like this that
Yeah, I mean,
the villain can't just be the villain.
right. Well, the twist is either someone's pulling her strings,
Yeah.
she's better intended, then like she might genuinely believe she's doing a good thing and not see the consequences, or
Yeah,
she's so much worse than we realize.
yeah, you could, yeah,
Like
could be, yeah,
this might be the sympathetic version of her.
could be,
She might actually be
yeah.
more corrupt than you can
Yeah.
fathom.
But there's some other level than the superficial, the superficial stuff we're presented with in these four issues, because that's all we have time for. You know, is it everything about her is standard issue supervillain stuff. You know,
Right.
and so you would expect there would be some other level, whether it's a good level or bad level, don't know. But you would expect that if the story continued, you definitely get more on her, and it would become more than just her desire to be controlling the world through Romulus or whatever. You know, there's some other level to go to. And that's what I was talking about earlier about, you just don't have time here to really delve into the characters. You don't get much more out of them, because you just don't have time, you know?
Right.
Like we don't
Yeah, I would
know
say we probably met a total of 12 characters,
12
and I
people.
feel
Yeah. Only
like people.
only five of them really matter. Four and a half really. I don't know the Caliban character, the one who trains Ash, the Illuminati. He's only like a cameo appearance,
But he
but
might
like
be like he might have been the whole next middle arc where she realizes
yeah,
like,
yes.
I ran in there impulsively, I need to train.
Yeah,
Uh
yeah, yeah, that's true. That is true.
so it could be a Dagobah situation for a few issues, or um you also have what if her shadow whose arm she cuts off, what if he gets basically fired by Romulus, he's off the meds, starts thinking
Mhm.
for himself. What if he's the one to kill Reagan in the end
Yeah,
after pairing up with that?
yeah,
It's just like they left themselves so much good material on the table.
yeah.
um
And obviously, it's also very clear that there are more members of the Illuminati that we haven't met. So, instead of bringing some of them back, what they probably would, it's obviously right for you to just bring in new characters as the start of the next arc, because that's how story progresses, you know? So they're not limited to just what you have here. But yeah, you're right. We really only get four characters in depth, five if you count the Caliban character, who we just see as like he's the trainer, and again he's the one who claims that he knows that he knew Ash's mom. So yeah, it's again fairly clear that that's set up for something greater. He knows more than what we see, than what he tells. He knows more than what we see him tell Ash. You
yes.
know, and whether we got that, what form we got that told to us, is debatable and up in the air because we never got it. But it does seem obvious that we would have gotten it in some form. Um, but again, we just don't have enough time to really delve into anyone's character too deeply. Said really other than Ash, which makes sense. She's the main character. She's the protagonist. But you just they set themselves up to have these roads to go down.
Yeah. And like I said at the top of the episode, in some ways it's a gift.
Yeah,
Unfortunately it doesn't come with a gift receipt,
yeah,
but it's one of those where it's like it can remain basically a perfect four issue stint in my mind. Whereas, there's all these good roads that could have gone down. There are also some really lame, generic, too many
definitely.
bad notes from the editing team, or the,
Bad
executives.
choices. Well, bad choices from
Um,
the creators. Something that they thought was a
right.
good idea that maybe
Or
ages
yeah,
poorly or
overly
whatever.
reactive to cultural events.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's all kinds of things that can steer it in the wrong direction. And so it's just one of those like, would you rather have a little bit of something really good or a lot of something that could have gone mediocre and droning? Because like the
Exactly. Yeah.
level of excitement and momentum I had for these first four issues, I don't think there's a book. I don't think there's more than five books that have sustained that level of excitement for me for
Yeah.
like
It's
dozens and dozens of
yeah.
issues.
It's definitely hard. And yeah. Of
I
course,
well, I was gonna say there were none, and then I was like, no, that's pretty much how I feel about Saga. It's like
yeah.
I've never been like, all right, well, that's enough Saga reading for now.
I mean, again,
Like, yeah, just keep it
it,
coming.
of course, we're not saying this book would have been great all the way through. We cannot have said, there's no way we could predict that. But I think you're right. I think what the phrase you use about this being a pilot episode and knowing that it's just set up for the actual story. I really love that because that's definitely now how I feel about this. This was a really good pilot. You're like, God, I wish there was more. And there are plenty of shows that have great pilots that by the time they get to episode 7 of the first season, you're like, boy, this is bad. Like this took like this didn't live up to the what the premise was at the start. And it's possible this book could have done that. I think the obvious trap would have been what you said, being overly reactive to real world situations and ideas. Because again, I think as I mentioned before, this book was primed for that, to do something like that. And again, I said it could have been good, it could have been bad. The easiest bear trap though would have been to do that and have it not be good. I couldn't help but think, like, so here we have a pop star who's a psychic and who's also part of one of these shadowy cabals that run the world. And a fun right-wing talking point, fun in the heaviest quotes ever,
Right.
is the idea that Taylor Swift is secretly like a CAA psyop,
Oh
you
yeah.
know? And so
That old chestnut.
yeah, so you read this now and you're like, well, so here we have a psychically manipulative pop star who's a global superstar who actually is part of the shadowy cabal that runs the world, you know? And it seems like that's a character that you could have been like, oh, they could be pulling a lot of stuff from real life. And you could see the possibility of them making what I would think absolutely horrendous mistake of bringing in things of like the way a certain segment of the population views specifically Taylor Swift, you know, and
Right.
her role in larger world events outside of being a musician and an entertainer.
Oh,
And
I
and
mean,
and
if
and
you just re-released these issues, like
people would
not
think
that
that,
that would ever happen, but they would think that's what it's riffing on.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas
And
like
and
I
and
had not
look.
heard a Taylor Swift song in 2016.
Oh well, I mean, but
She was out there. I just,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
was
she was still
lagging behind on
well,
pop music.
she was still country at that point. She actually wasn't literally wasn't a pop star. She was a country star then, I think. I think of the timeline's correct. I'd have maybe check the numbers there, which I'm not going to bother to do.
Well, we'll
But you're
find out
right.
real soon if we have a Swiftie listening.
That is true.
'Cause, yeah,
Yeah.
I think they might be they might know about the internet and be active. I don't know.
They might, there are some Swifties we can reach out to and ask. But you are right that the idea that now you read this and you see that character and it's totally Taylor Swift coded in retrospect,
Right.
you know. And you said so that idea of pulling inspiration from real world ideas and situations. Yeah, you could see that going a number of ways, and for me, I think most of those ways would end up being very poor, just because I think that kind of one-to-one just it isn't going to work. But again, I find it humorous, this idea that they chose to go this route of globally famous pop stars is part of the invisible hand that controls the world, and that is what some people literally think is Taylor Swift's whole deal, you know.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, which makes me wonder who they had in mind when they were depicting this. It's like,
I don't know, I don't think it
I guess
matters. I
it doesn't matter. No, I'm
Yeah.
just curious. Like, it was too late to be Madonna. And like, who filled that gap of like, the provocative, controversial, female pop star that was a lightning rod for conspiracy theories and propaganda.
Well, I mean, in terms of superstar status at that point, it would have been someone like Beyonce. But yeah, but she doesn't get the tag of being part of the secret cabal, you know. So
Right.
that part doesn't stick to her. But yeah, I think they maybe just like the idea of the fact that this is an entertainer, someone who has this public persona, and then who can also, I mean, is basically juicing the numbers because she is also a psychic who can be, like emotionally manipulative to people, you know? So I don't know, but I just think it's an interesting choice that they made, and one that in retrospect, again, seems like it's more relevant now than it would have been when this book came out in 2016. Just like you mentioned earlier and last week, that if this book were to continue, if they came back to it now, not picked up in 2017, but if they decided to release a new issue now, a lot of the ideas and structures that make up their world that people think about our world are probably even more ingrained, and they're at least more acknowledged, or people are more aware of them now, whether they believe it or not. They're more aware that there are people that do believe in this, and so it is in a lot of ways prescient and more relevant now if they ever went back to it, because our world once again has progressed in a way that we are now closer to art than in prior years when the art was trying to comment on society or a form of society. You know, we've moved towards the fictional worlds
Right. It's
in
life
real life.
imitating art.
Yeah, and not in the good ways, and mostly the bad way.
Yeah, although I think there is some degree to which we flatter ourselves, and this is an evergreen issue, and someone could have read these issues in the 1960s and been like, "Oh,
And thought the
like this
same
is
thing.
written
Yeah,
for our time."
that
Um,
is. I mean,
which is why
the
like
idea.
everyone thinks they're living in Orwellian society,
Well, and
even
again,
though all of us look back 20 years ago and think like, "Man, if only it was like that."
yeah. I mean, I think this book tells on itself in that way by literally using the word Illuminati. You know, like even though their Illuminati isn't, as far as we know, it doesn't appear to be the Illuminati that people think exists in our world. You know, but just by calling it the Illuminati, like there's an intention there because they know, like the Order of Romulus, like you made something up there that sounds pretty cool and badass, you know. But you say Illuminati, and everyone has an idea of what that is. Whether they agree on that is a different story. But that evokes a very specific type of organization, you know.
Right.
And so to use that in the book, they have to be making a statement about it, especially when they're presented in these first four issues as the quote unquote good side, you know?
Yeah. What would be my okay, so my favorite thing ever in the world, if they did this, if they ever went back to it, I would want to find out that the Illuminati of this comic world uses YouTube videos to communicate with its members, but like the popular Illuminati videos are all coded. Like only actual members know how to decode them. Like the
Sure.
stuff that looks like the dumbest, craziest conspiracy stuff is like all it means. It's like a guy with a chalkboard in his mom's basement, like drawing all this stuff, and somehow is communicating like, yeah, I mean it's this place for coffee at 2. Um, and that's all there is to it. It's just like really elaborate ways to, because I feel like that would be both reinforcing and subverting the
At the same
notions of
time.
what this stuff is. And I think that's kind of what they indicated that they were doing
It seemed like,
with
because again,
these like cult things.
well, yeah, because
It's like, oh no, 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 they're real.
yeah,
But the people
but
who know about them don't know anything about them.
yeah, because you can't use Illuminati and not expect people to have to conjure an image of what they think that is, you know, because they could have named that other group literally anything, you know, like I guess they couldn't call it Remus because that would be too obvious, right?
Right.
That's too on the nose. But then Illuminati again, that's an idea people have, and so people bring that baggage with them to the book. So yeah, I have to assume you use that, you weaponize that pre understanding of that word against the reader by trying to then at some point subvert it and flip it on them. Um, but again, we'll never know. But that's one of those things that I would love to ask. You know, if people have listened to this and know that I try to attend a lot of comic conventions. I'm a big fan of it. I love to go. I love to bring multiple books to have been signed by multiple creators. It's a thing I love to do.
The
My
quest.
collection of signed comics is just about 1,000 individual issues that are signed, some with multiple signatures on them. But Bryan Hill is someone that I've never seen at a show before. I think he was at New York Comic Con when I was there in 2019, but he didn't have a table. He was signing at I think at a publisher's booth, and I missed it. But this is he is someone I would love to go to, so I could hand him this book because I would want to see what his reaction is. You
Yeah.
know, because there are those books because there's a part of me as someone who likes to get books signed is like when you go to a big time creator and you hand them the number one of the super popular thing that they've probably signed literally 50 of that day already, you know?
Yeah, they're
And I
probably
and
like, I can't believe there's a copy I haven't signed out there still.
yeah, and I'm totally fine being that very basic person. But there's also a part of me that's like, you want to find the thing that you think no one's going to bring, you know? And oftentimes
You got to
so
live that
what's
vicariously for me. You took my copy of Beneath the Trees #1 first print
yes, yeah,
and
yeah,
got a
yeah, to
stunned
Patrick Horvath, yeah,
reaction.
yeah, yeah, because it was a low print run. I think about this. I was the first time one time I saw Jim Lee, and he was doing a signing, and the number of people that brought his very first published work, which is something like Samurai Santa or something like that, like like his first ever published work anywhere. The number of folks who brought that, who had that in line, who most definitely thought they'd be the only person to have that in line.
Yeah.
You know, I get a kick out of stuff like that. But yeah, you want to bring. I like to bring the book that's gonna make the creator be like, "Whoa, haven't seen one of these in a while," you know, or like, "Oh my god,"
The
like
only risk is like if you realize he canceled it because he hated it for some reason. Like I would find
okay,
that so devastating. Be like,
well,
oh no, I've
okay,
like talked about this book so much,
okay, but then like, no,
disproportionately so much for 6 years.
I, I can roll with something like that. Be like, well, I brought it here. I'd like you to sign it, even if you hate it, and you write a comment on it. That's fine. Um, I can live with that because then it makes it unique then. But
Yeah.
he is someone Bryan Edward Hill is someone I would like to meet. Um, because I have other books for him to sign that I'd want him to get, but this is the one where I'd be like, I'd want to drop this in front of him and just to see what his reaction is to it, and hopefully maybe get some, get a bit of conversation of like, yeah, what were you and Nelson Blake like? What were you guys planning? Like, because this book just ends, and we haven't gone back to it. Like, just to get a sense and see if it's an idea that's still in him or not. And the answer could be no. It could be like, yeah, we did a book, it was fine, we got canceled and moved on, and he hasn't thought about it again. That could totally be the case. And if so, great. But this is definitely a book that if Bryan Hill were ever at a show nearest me, that I would make an effort to go to specifically to get this issue signed. Because I do have issue 1. I think I went and found that for the very reason of if I saw Bryan Hill at a show, I'd want to get it signed, you know? Because
Oh yeah.
when it came out, I read it digitally, but in the intervening years, I bought the issue #1 just in case, just in case I ever see him on a guest list at a con. I want to bring this form to him because I want to get him to sign it because I want to get his thoughts on it because
Yeah, I
I'd be
think
so
San
curious.
Diego, New York, or Chicago is basically all you're gonna. Someone who's like in
Well,
TV and film is
yeah,
not gonna make the smaller con circuits.
I think he's a West Coast guy. And like I said, I'm pretty certain he was at New York when I was there, but he wasn't an artist alley. So he was like, I had to go to the image table or something like that for his signing, whatever it was. And I was probably in line for someone else at that point and could have made it. So, missed opportunity there, but I hold on to that issue for the off chance that I could get it. Cause I, it's one of those books that I'm dying to know. I want to see his reaction if like someone brought this book, and just I'd want to get a chance to ask him about it and just to see like, what did you guys have planned? Like how long did you guys think this was going to go? When you and Blake were putting together all that back matter and you're building the world out, like, did you guys have a sense of what you thought it could get to? Because whether creators say that or not, they have in the back of their mind, they're thinking like, man, if we get to issue 12, we get to issue 18 or whatever, like that's when this thing is going to hit, or we've planned it out in 4 story arcs or whatever it may be. There's always something like that in the back of their head, and I'd love to get a chance to ask him.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. If he was coming to a show that I was going to, this would be the first thing you pull. It's like,
Yeah,
and it's one of those like indicators of like, I want signatures for my personal collection because they're meaningful to me, not because
yeah,
they're
yeah.
valuable.
Well,
Because
yeah, yes, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
like,
But there is
in terms
still,
of value, you might as well have him sign a napkin.
yeah, yeah,
Versus Romulus #1.
yeah.
It's just like
Here's
not
a backing board to
intrinsically good
sign.
value.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah. But there is that hipster part of me that's like, I'm in this line with like 50 people, and
But I'm a real fan.
well, no, it's like 40 that have the same 5 issues, but like no one's got this one. There's a party that's like, I bet if I asked everybody real quick here, and anybody got this issue, whether it's Romulus #1 or whatever it is, for whatever creator it is. Um, there are certain issues for certain creators that's like pretty certain I'm the only one bringing this here today, and that's a smug feeling I like to have, just for myself. I'm not putting that in anyone's, but when you stand in line and you're in a line long enough, oftentimes you're just like, hey, what do you got in your pile there? What are you getting signed? And you do a quick comparison of the books you got, and you see a lot of people have the same amount of stuff there, but every once in a while you see someone have something that no one else has, or sometimes that person's you. And that's a cool feeling when you're surrounded by other people who are wanting the same thing as you, but you've got something different. Like that's a cool feeling. And I feel like Romulus is be one of those books where you'd be in line for Nelson Blake or Bryan Hill, and you would see Postal. You'd see a lot of Witchblade stuff. You'd probably see like I'd bring Black Panther, Ultimate Black Panther #1, right now, if I saw Bryan Hill, obviously, probably bring Fallen Angels. You see a lot of the same books, but you just kind of wonder, like, how many y'all read Romulus, And for me, it's not about like ranking my fandom. It's just like, yeah, man, like I read this thing and you didn't. And there's a inner smugness I take out of that I enjoy. So yeah, one of these days I'll catch him at a show.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
my closest moment to that was Mike DiCarlo. I had now this like he thought he'd seen it before because I brought a Death in the Family issue of Batman,
Mhm.
but I bought mine at a used record store in Copenhagen, and it was a Danish reprint.
That's right. I remember that issue. You got
And
that one
he
signed. That's right. You did. That's right. You
I
did.
did,
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's got like the hole punched in the spine for like being in the discount bin in Denmark or whatever. But he was like, well, congratulations. I didn't even know this existed. And
Yeah.
it's clearly 30, 40 years old,
Yep.
in Danish,
Yep.
which we have to use Google Translate to read it. But he recognized all the panels and everything in the cover art's
Oh,
very
yeah.
cool.
It's all
So
there.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it has basically no objective value. Like no, like there are collectors out there, but no one's collecting the Danish versions of Batman from the 80s.
Oh no, there's probably someone out there that's out to get every foreign
Yeah.
language translation of a certain type of book or whatnot. But yeah, no, I mean I love stuff like that. I mean, every time my brother Tony goes to Korea, his in-laws live in Korea, and they go and visit there. I always talk to him and like, hey, swing by a comic shop and find me something cool. Something in Korean. I have volume one of Matt Fraction and David Aha's Hawkeye in Korean. I have a Sandman Volume 1 Deluxe Edition in Korean as well. And stuff like that's just, I like having that because, yeah, there is no objective value to that, but it's just something cool to have. And if I
Yeah.
can get a single issue of something like that, that is printed in a different language, I would absolutely get that signed because you put that down in front of a creator and they're gonna be like, this is crazy. And oftentimes you give them something like that, it's something that they haven't seen in a while or never seen before. And again, I can't imagine how many times someone has brought an issue of Romulus to Bryan Hill at a show, you know? So and yeah, you don't know what the reaction is going to be, but oftentimes when you bring that to someone, when you bring it to a creator, like they light up when they see it, because they haven't seen a book in a while. They haven't seen it, whether it's old or it's rare or low print count, whatever it is, they haven't seen it in a while. You can see them light up and they start flipping through it, and you can see they're remembering creating it, and yeah, you can bring that back to someone and be like, yeah, I was a fan of this, and I know maybe no one else here is, and I'm never gonna get any more of this, but like this specific piece of work that you put time and effort into, like I appreciate it and I enjoyed it. And so I like being able to be in a position to give that back to a.
Totally. Well,
Yep.
for everyone listening, keep looking through your dollar bins and find your copy of Romulus 1 so
Yeah.
we all can we'll, we'll all be in line with Romulus 1 at the same
Yeah.
show, and
Yeah.
he will just think to himself, what the hell is happening?
Yeah.
Um,
Did something happen? Yeah.
it's
Yeah. We
almost
should.
at that point, it's almost a good prank. Just
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
give them out in line. Um, so anyway, well, thank you for listening. Thank you for picking up like an obscure little book with us, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's an absolute blast. And honestly, it's one of those that I could reread probably once a year just because letting my imagination run with it. I like the art. And there's like some great quotes in it too. Like, I don't think I said that.
There is
Some like some
the
thoughtful, nice, like punchy quotes.
I think it's just an overall well written book. I think the writing is very very solid. Again, we talked about the action sequences. I think the fight scenes are very good. They're not overly busy, but you're never lost in it. You know where everyone is. You can see the action. It's just it it's a good book to read. And yeah, if you just I'm sure every time you read it, you can probably pick up something new and let that be your head canon for where the story goes next. You know, whether you're following what you think Ash's character is going to do, what you think the Reagan character is going to do, or whatever it is, you can latch on to a different part of the setup, a different piece on the board, and decide where what their trajectory would have been in the hypothetical issues to follow. You know,
Yeah.
and the world is rich enough that you can put those pieces together kind of and rearrange them any way you want, and in your mind come up with an exciting and interesting story.
Yeah. Just to build on what they did.
Yep.
So anyway, we're once again in the situation of not knowing exactly what comes next.
We have some
although-
ideas.
Yeah,
ideas
we're
kicking
recording so
around.
far in advance that it's it would feel crazy to do this, but we will keep you posted on social media and other places with what's coming next. Or if you like a good surprise, tune in next week for another creator spotlight, which will give you a full week's lead time to track down and read what's going to come after this.
Yep.
So thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.